I'm recording this video for the purposes of my EDU580 class, which is teaching ESL methods and techniques through Georgetown College. The aim of this course is to instruct graduate students in the best teaching techniques and methods for reaching CLD students, which is culturally and linguistically diverse students, which is considered more politically correct to call them that rather than ESL or ELL. So I loved your lesson. I thought that you were doing a great job at demonstrating comprehensible input, which is basically, even though you're speaking in English, you're doing a lot with your hands, a lot with your bodies, and a lot of modeling with gummy worms and with the materials that you're using, so that even though he doesn't understand English, he can follow what you're doing and understand what he's doing, what he needs to be doing. So I can't remember, did you receive his PSP and Can-Do statements before that lesson?
No.
Okay.
No. I had a discussion with the teachers, but no formal documentation.
Okay, great. That's what I thought, because I thought she gave them as I was in there. So are you familiar with WIDA and the Can-Do statements and all of that?
Nope.
Okay. So that's what I assumed. So WIDA is just, there's not an acronym, it's just WIDA, which I found interesting. But it's basically focusing on what the students can do, instead of a lot of people focus on what they can't do. Especially, have you noticed when someone asks you about your class, I tend to be like, well, half of them can't read. Or so we focus on the negatives, and that's where we want to grow. But with a CLD student, they want to focus on what they can do. So according to his PSP, he can answer yes and no questions accurately. He can draw in response to an oral description, and he can match illustrated words and phrases. So knowing that, does that change the way you would have given
it would have, definitely, especially when I got to certain parts of it. Like I could have prepared ahead of time with some other, drawings or something on the side to help them with that.
Yeah, that's great. So the Can-Do statements are a product of the access test, which every CLD student takes at least once a year, and that just assesses their fluency and proficiency in the 4 domains of language, which is reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So based on his scores, he's in an entering level, which means he's not proficient really at all. He's just coming into our country, which you knew that from kind of the background knowledge that you had with the family. Did they come to curriculum night for you?
The mother did come to curriculum night and brought someone that could interpret for her.
Excellent. That's what she did for the brother. So I printed out your lesson plan, and I just wanted to go through a few of the things that I would have maybe changed, and you probably would have too, having known the PSP and Can-Do descriptors. So first, I would recommend a home visit at your earliest convenience. Typically, they recommend to do these before the school year starts, just so that you can talk with his family. Maybe you could even bring Senor Dunford or another translator from the district to meet with them in their home, so that they're not as nervous about coming into a school where no one speaks their language. You're kind of on their turf at their time. So that really works with their work schedules. If they're working at a job where maybe they can't always come in to the parent-teacher nights or curriculum nights. It would also help you get a better understanding of maybe their economics and where they live and the means that they're living at. You could also talk to him about things that he already learned in 4th or in 3rd grade in Mexico. If he was in school in Mexico, what school in Mexico looked like, just to get that background knowledge about him. There's research that shows this common underlying proficiency by Cummins shows that if they learn something in their native language, they don't need to relearn it in English. They just need the vocabulary. The concept is already there. So
I kind of see that a little bit with the math work that he does.
Yes, exactly. So he might not know how to say 5 in English, but he knows how to do these simple additions. So we
I can see that with computation. With him.
So we don't have to start all the way at the beginning with him.
Good.
So if you're at a home visit and you're asking, this year and we're going to be learning about this, and he's like, oh, I already know how to do that. Then I don't have to start from the very beginning with this. So that's one thing.
That's a good framework for me, because I wasn't even thinking about it in that way.
Yeah, good. I'm so happy. So also going with the background knowledge and the schema that they already have. If we know that, I'm going to call him Juan for the purpose of this video. Juan's family is from a big farm. We know that from what Mrs. Kemper, our ELL teacher, has told us. And so there's a possibility of connecting to that schema that he knows. So I thought for this experiment with gummy worms, you could connect to maybe a compost and maybe present a small video, trigger that prior knowledge of, oh, hey, I've worked with this before, I know what this means. And then maybe present the problem of the 9 scientific process skills in a farming situation. Okay. So wow, we've got all these different types of worms in this compost. How are we going to classify them? How are we going to organize them? Can we predict what will happen if it rains and they sit in water overnight? So just kind of connecting that to the real world for him. Okay. I would recommend using as many cognates as possible. Do you know what a cognate is?
They just told me what that was. Great. Miss Kemper and Miss Swift has started making that connection for him and me.
Right. That's awesome. So I didn't know what a cognate was either, but it basically, for the purpose of the video, is connecting the English word with a very similar word from his native language. So I looked up the 9 scientific process skills in English and then what they are in Spanish. So observe is observar. Communicate, communicar. So they're very similar.
Oh, that's going to, because this is going to be a continuing process in the classroom. So this is very helpful.
Great. I'll leave this with you. Okay. So they are very similar. The only one that I didn't think was super similar was measure, medir, kind of. But even if you can look up those before the lesson and realize, hey, we're talking about modeling, modelo, that's very similar. So even if you just throw in that quick Spanish word to give him a cue, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, I know what that is. I've done modeling in Spanish schools for 4 years. This is great. Okay. So I would recommend trying to use as many cognates as possible with him.
That's okay.
Okay, visual aids. According to his PSP, which you did not get before this, but some of his accommodations would be adapt the pace of instruction, adapt the materials, prompting and cueing, which you did with your hands, but you could also prompt and cue using some visual aids. So what visual aids do you think you could have used during your lesson to help him keep on track with what you were doing?
I think maybe some pictures, like especially for like the drawing portion, maybe of a kid drawing something.
Exactly.
And I didn't even think of it at the time, but I actually had some pictures that matched the science process skills.
Oh, yeah, that would have been great. Exactly.
So I just do a lot of like, I do hand motions, like you said.
Yes.
But that way I could have left him go and attend to somebody else if I would have had a picture.
So this integrated content-based method of instruction is a way that they are kind of proposing that we as educators structure our lessons. So coming up with an overarching theme of science, and then coming with a topic from that theme, and then from that topic creating a language objective as well as a content objective. Okay. So a language objective might be I can use the 9 scientific process words, or I could write something. So the domains of language: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Okay. So you can also, after you do those objectives, is come up with visuals that help point him towards those objectives. So it could be anything as simple as a T-chart. Could be a graphic organizer if you're a Venn diagram, comparing and contrasting. I wrote down that I would maybe, for the segments of the worm, segmentos is a good cognate. It's very close to segment. So maybe I might have a gummy worm or a worm with arrows pointing to the segments and say segmentos and maybe a question mark, or how many and then a question mark, so that he has that visual of, okay, I know there are, if you just said segmentos, he's like, okay, I know that, but what do I do with that? And maybe that poster would have been a good cue for him. And then also when you were doing the inferring with the, what was it, the colors? Yeah. That how predicting the next, what's the word I'm searching for? Like group of colors.
Yeah.
So you could actually maybe pass out colored chips or colored pieces of paper of all the types of worm and allow him to...
when he had to come up with all the possible combinations.
Yes, the combinations of it. So maybe allowing him... Because
that was
really hard,
That really was.
And even for some of the other kids who were understanding exactly what you were saying. So allowing him to see it on his desk, and maybe you work with him and put them together, and then allowing him to manipulate them. And that way understand a little bit more. So anything hands-on will really help a CLD student. Any visual cues will really help a CLD student. A couple more things. As I was going through, I saw you did this experiment whole class. Kind of one-on-one. They got their own gummy worms. They worked on their own paper. They talked to each other, but Juan mostly worked with you. There's some research that Vygotsky has put out in the 1970s that shows that children work and learn best from their peers. So I understand the idea of letting them have their own and be they're responsible for their own thing and make their own observations, and I think that is a great idea, but maybe let all of them have their own gummies and work in a group. So Juan is, we call this the silent period. So he's an emerging speaker. Right. So there's a theory that proposes, how do you learn language even from a baby? First, they listen, then they speak, then they read, then they write. It's the same when you're acquiring a different language. First, you listen. And right now, Juan's just listening. He's just trying to take it all in. And when he's ready, he'll start talking. Okay. So I do this in my class sometimes. I'm like, come up here and share with the class, and then I have to hold myself back. I want him to participate, but I don't want to push him to where he's uncomfortable because it's risky to try and speak a new language when the kids already all know it, and they might laugh. So if he were in a smaller group, instead of working one-on-one with you where you're asking him and expecting him to respond in English, he could sit there, especially with your other CLD students who are at different levels of proficiency, and he could just listen to what an appropriate group conversation is, what their take on some of the 9 process skills are, and then he could maybe get a better understanding and maybe even feel more comfortable to speak.
He did really well we did an engineering challenge last week.
Oh, great.
And he really participated in that, and it was a group project.
Yeah.
And the day that we did it was curriculum night. So his mom even came and said he came home and talked about what he did in that group.
Oh, that's fantastic. So group work, there's this thing called an affective filter, and it's basically things that might make him nervous or scared. So talking one-on-one with an adult might raise that affective filter and make him kind of shrink back and not want to speak. But if he's talking with a peer, the affective filter lowers because it's okay for him to make a mistake with that peer. So that's what I would recommend. And I didn't get to see the assessment that you did. I know the formative assessment of the paper.
That didn't go very well for him.
Okay. What kind of assessment was it?
It was like a standard test that everybody else would have been given with a fill in the blank, which the process skill went in there. Basically, the sentence was the definition of the word, and then they had to put the process skill in there.
Was there a word bank of any kind?
There was a word bank at the top, and he did try to do it with the Google Translate.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
But my concern with Google Translate is if I'm checking his work, I don't know if sometimes when it translates the words, if it changes the order of anything, which could change my ability to grade it, thinking it's going to be this, but it could be something else.
That makes a lot of sense.
That was more evident to me when we were doing main idea. I think it would have still worked on that test, but I'm hesitant to just grade it straight out without knowing.
Right. Was he in this classroom with everybody else taking it, or was he pulled out with Miss Swift or Miss
He was in here.
Okay. So for his PSP, it's recommended or required, I'm not quite sure, that he be given the test in a small group setting or a one-on-one setting, and that he's allowed double time in order to finish it. So for a Spanish speaker, he hears the directions or reads it in English, then he's got to translate it to Spanish, then he's got to answer it in Spanish, then he's got to figure out how to translate it back to English. So it takes a lot more time. So I would recommend giving him a little bit extra time, or maybe even when you're speaking to him, just pausing a little bit, giving him a little extra time to process that, and then speak back to you or answer a question. when he is doing this vocabulary skills, this lesson was very heavy on vocabulary. That was not the first lesson.
What we did is we learned each individual process skill over the course of like one day using a PowerPoint and an activity. This was kind of like bringing it to culmination, and that's why everybody had their own stuff, because it was apply your knowledge of this process skill.
Great. Yeah, I was hoping you would say that, because one of the recommendations that I would suggest is allowing him a bilingual dictionary. That's one of his accommodations.
I actually asked Francine, like,
if you had one.
Yeah, if we have one, or how can I get one, or can I order it with school fees?
I would suggest letting him make one. Okay. So for this one, you said you went over the 9 process skills, 1 per day. So he could even just take, just a piece of paper and have the English word and then the cognate, the Spanish word next to it, and then maybe allow him some time to draw a picture to reference that. For observe, observar, and then a picture of each of the 5 senses. Okay. And then that could be his. There could be a definition in there in English and in Spanish, but if you're wanting him to utilize it on a test and you don't want him to have that answer, then you could just have the pictures and have it clue in, and that would be a good resource for him as he's writing. He's learning the English, he's learning this, or connecting it to Spanish instead of just looking it up and having it pre-made. Okay. So those are my recommendations. Do you have any questions for me or anything that wasn't super clear about?
No, I think you've shared a lot of information with me, actually.
So and you did a really good job, better than I'm doing right now with his brother.
Yeah, but my child's at a completely different level.
Right.
Mine has the benefit of already being able to read.
Yes, that is helpful. So just any time that you can connect it to the native language. Sometimes as English speakers in an English-speaking school, we think, okay, we're done with that. We're learning English now. And we don't want to confuse him. We're done with Spanish. We want him to start speaking English. But it's proven that that does not work as well as we think that it does. Okay. And by allowing him to feel that his native language is valued, so even maybe incorporating it into your lesson. I do that with mine when we do tens and ones. I use like cuantos, and then I say how many. Or when I ask them to get out their red journals, sometimes I only speak it in Spanish. Okay. Get out your azul modelo, your blue journal. And so my kids are learning Spanish and recognizing that that's valuable. So my student is realizing, okay, my first language, I don't need to get rid of that. That's part of me. That's an asset. We want them to be bilingual. That would be huge. So just allowing as much as you can for that native language to come into this classroom and making him feel like it's a safe place for him to speak to you in Spanish, teach his other students and classmates Spanish, and also connect those Spanish words that he knows with the new vocabulary. Okay. So thank you so much for letting me observe you and talk to you. I really appreciate it.
We got to work on this together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.